Dear white people, as I'm sure most of you thought this show was about black people speaking to white people, I'd argue that could be further from the truth. I'm actually surprised there aren't more reviews or videos about the show given how outraged people were at the preview. I'm sure they realized how misplaced their anger was when they actually watched it, or they just didn't watch it at all. When I first saw the preview, it seemed like it was strategically edited to cause controversy and get people to watch and analyze it to find some way to be offended, and for certain more liberal black people to think they have yet another outlet that shows the cliche struggles of being black in America. Unfortunately, Netflix chickened out and deleted the preview when they actually got a slew of negative results. But after watching the show, it would have been a better idea to keep it up and make those who reacted prematurely reevaluate their habit to jump to conclusions when it comes to subjects dealing with race in America, and just be as sensitive as the side they complain about. Though the series is written in a way to introduce new people to the show, the series actually picks up where the movie left off. And if you watch the movie, you can kind of get an idea of the series. They focus on shedding light on real issues and arguments we face in America that pertain to race using satire, and try to give the perspective from both sides of the black and white dichotomy. It's definitely a show geared more toward the black audience, but I feel people from other cultures can watch and enjoy the humor and drama in the show. There doesn't seem to be a clear-cut side that the writers are sticking up for, and the series doesn't focus on championing one set of ideas for blacks or whites for that matter. The series dives much deeper into the individual characters and introduces a few new characters as well. Then as you start to watch the dramedy, you see the writing has layers upon layers that paints a pretty well-rounded understanding of the black experience, and also how it can affect our perception in ways that don't necessarily reflect all black people's experiences. You start to see the characters as individuals instead of as a unit representing the larger culture. The show also pokes fun at some of the beliefs and arguments black people hold that don't make sense or reflect the truth, and even makes fun of SJWs and BuzzFeed, for Christ's sake. They also look into people's perception of black people that contributes to the divide culturally. The show grapples with trying to uphold what the general consensus of quote-unquote being black is to appease those you relate to most, while trying to learn to compromise in order to get ahead in life with people who may not be from your culture but either possess great qualities as a person or the power to make or break your career or future. Now the main character, Samantha White. A mixed woman, I feel, embodies this dichotomy of living two different lives in the same world, and the burdens that comes with, like having trouble finding your true identity and what you want for yourself rather than what others want from you to push their agenda or their idea of what you should be. For example, she's in love with a Macy's model looking ass liberal white dude named Gabe who wants to go public with her. He's a cool, laid back, smart dude who's understanding of her cause and wants to learn more about her perspective, even though he feels like an outcast. But she still feels a distance when it comes to experiences in life since he's white and she's part of the Black Student Union and one of the main activists on campus for black people. Now with that reputation comes the pressure from her friends to be with the strong, unapologetically black man who was her sidekick from BSU because it fits the black power she preaches, even though she doesn't feel a connection with this nigga like the white dude. There's something interesting that unfolds in this little trio in the show that complicates things even further, but I'll let you watch the show if you want to find out, you know what I mean? I think the show brilliantly uses humor to convey points in a showdown, with both sides walking away feeling like they lost the battle because the other side poked holes in their logic. You get to see the internal struggle people can have once presented with new information or ideas that contradict their stern stance. Another pretty interesting character of the show was Calandria, aka Coco, oh beautiful chocolate ass. This woman is what most black communities consider a self-hating black person who wants to be white. While you definitely see why people get that idea of her, the series goes much deeper into her story, which shows she grew up in Chicago around predominantly black people who showed her being black is ugly, basically. You start to see that her desire to fit in with the white people came from her need to flee the fate she was most likely to suffer had she stayed in the environment in which she was growing up. It just so happens a white man takes her from the hood at a young age and gives her opportunities to show her value and make a lucrative career. This gives her access to opportunities nobody from her community ever offered or strived for generally. Now, Coco said one thing that really sat with me when people were arguing about a gun being pulled on Reggie, another character I'll get into later. And when other students wanted to go handle the cops with violence, she started talking about handling it by trying something different than doubling down on our blackness and being out for blood, to which Lionel replied, "You're talking about assimilation." Coco replied, "No, I'm talking about self-preservation. Quote me correctly." Now this quote basically sums up her character in a nutshell if you ask me. Coco is the type of black person who has a more conservative mindset and understands that America is a mostly white population and culture. To get where she wants to go in life, she will have to reinvent herself to combat the personality people from her neighborhood usually develop, as well as what baggage people automatically assume she carries. Now that's how a lot of black people feel when they have to go somewhere they're not familiar with or feel welcomed, because it's their only realistic shot at a better life. It's a common feeling amongst any minority culture that has to assimilate to the dominant culture. It's definitely how I felt going to a white Catholic college preparatory and still mostly bonding with people who came from my neighborhood or similar backgrounds. I still created relationships with people from different cultures that I feel closer to and are more reliable than niggas I've known my entire life. It's known that being dark-skinned leads some people to make assumptions about your character, and to show that Coco has much more to offer than a loud mouth and good pussy, she dialed down the black culture she knows to make people in positions of power comfortable enough to work with her, or to want to work with her. This may not be ideal or something that a person enjoys, but when you're a minority of a situation, it's easier to accept the core principles of the dominant culture to have more access to opportunities in that culture. That's just common sense. I do want to point out that this isn't proof of racism, nor do I feel the person is a sellout or a fake for knowing how to appease different cultures, especially if you genuinely appreciate said cultures. In the series, you see subtle lines of black characters admitting to enjoying certain aspects of the dominant European culture and guilty pleasures of shows that feed into black stereotypes. And one character essentially says sometimes being carefree and black is an act of revolution. Overall, Coco was a great embodiment of the dark-skinned girl with a chip on her shoulder, and I enjoyed seeing her character show the benefits of allowing yourself to be a part of a different culture without losing who you are overall, and how you can lose yourself overall if you let it go too far. Another character that was pretty interesting to me was Troy. Troy is the black kid who inherits his father's wealth, along with his ambition and his reputation to uphold being the black man white people in power can depend on to play his part in racial relations. Troy is a young black man who is set to surpass his dad in every way if he plays along and continues down the path his father basically set for him, even though it's a predestined and easier choice out of the paths he sees available to him. He can't help but feel trapped by his father's idea of him and everyone that depends on him to be the man that can help get the opposition on their side. Of course, the black students see him as a sellout, to which even Troy starts to question if he truly is helping black people and knows who he is as a person, along with his purpose in life. Homie gets blowed and hides it from everybody. He lies constantly, he's manipulative, but he also has a similar role as Samantha. In playing both sides of the race debate, except she sees it as a negative, whereas Troy embraces it and uses it to his advantage. While he has a slight disconnect with all that popular black culture sees as black, he obviously has the community's best interest at heart and is relatable in more ways than not. He's like the conservative Obama basically to me. Troy's character depicts the educated professional black man who isn't black enough for the black people that came from rougher backgrounds and experiences that they perceive as greater struggles than Troy can fathom, coming from his privileged, whitewashed background. But you start to see how this man isn't a threat or any less black because his parents decided to do what was necessary to live comfortably. I think Troy's character represents how a black man who seemingly has it all can have his own struggles as well that are relatable to being black, and some issues not so much. Now we get to the character Reggie, who is the complete opposite of Troy. He's a modern day pro-black man who still has an understanding that opportunities come from other cultures that you can learn from and use in your own way. Like the fact he knew black history, but also knew American history just as well. Or the fact that he went to a spoken word with pretty much all white liberal kids. Even then, he feels it's his duty to always continue to fight for black people in our perceived oppression, even to the point where he recognizes that when his life is on the line, he is the only one there for himself and protecting his life. There was a moment of clarity where he had a gun pulled on him, and the main character, Samantha White, went by his room afterwards. Now, instead of trying to console him and see him as a human being in that moment that has feelings and can be vulnerable, she saw him as a movement and was more worried about striking back or making his experience public. Now, this is a woman who knows he's basically in love with her and abused that power over him to use him for her own purposes, all while she's in love with another man. You know what I'm saying? So in that moment, I feel like he had a glimpse of not only how his life can still easily be taken or taken for granted, but also how alone he really is even when he's around his so-called brothers and sisters. I feel his character shows the idea that character and relationships go so much deeper than skin tone. And even an environment you're most comfortable with can be detrimental or misleading if you allow yourself to get lost in it. The complete opposite can be true for people you may not be comfortable around because they come from a different culture, but they still value your life and well-being based on their character. There were some other interesting prominent characters like Lionel, the gay, timid but courageous black nerd, or Joella, who's usually the voice of reason for both sides of the race dichotomy, and many other characters, but I just decided to name my favorite characters in the show. Overall, the characters, while representing a basic ideology on the surface, were all broken down into simple human beings with complex beliefs and ideas of themselves that became less clear to them, while simultaneously showing the audience more about who they truly are and how they can personally identify or empathize with the character in those moments. I thought it was a brilliant way to bring arguments to the surface while giving both sides what they would consider a fair assessment of their beliefs on the matter. This made it hard to dislike characters who represented the ideology you disagree with mostly in real life, because they would agree in other situations that are usually polarized and go the opposite way. Suddenly it became clear that both sides make good points and that one side may be right on one issue, but the other side may be right on a different issue. It gave a sense of analyzing issues individually instead of picking a side and blindly agreeing with their stance or any subject without admitting a different belief or idea may be the better one. Man, I personally like this show because it showed there's a spectrum of black people and that there is no quote-unquote right way to be black. Even though there may be a lot of similarities and experiences, there also may be many differences in experiences and a much wider variety than we admit between black people. Even though you have a group you identify with, you can still feel isolated and alone when around those people if they only accept you as a monologue instead of as someone who thinks independent of the group's mentality but still have a character as good as anyone else in your life that you admire. I hope it actually inspires certain groups of black people in America to be more willing to accept when their beliefs or actions are wrong, and to be more willing to work with others to achieve success rather than working together only to cause destruction or stir up controversy in mainstream media, which does nothing to change circumstances anymore. But hey, it's just a show. I don't think they expected it to change much, but to just provide entertainment and show us exactly how we look when we engage in these behaviors. This is Rev Outlier. Appreciate you taking your time to watch the show.